Imagine you're woken up by a knock on your door, and it's the police, and they've come to arrest you. What did I do, you ask? Well, as they handcuff you, they reply, you're being arrested for 3 Facebook posts you made last year. Which ones, you ask? Surely not the cat videos. No, they say, the ones where you criticize the government. I'd imagine that most of us would be serving hard time under this benchmark. Over the last year or two, you've probably criticized Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Brexit or the British government, depending on your politics and where you live. But imagine if you're taken into custody, they tell you that the penalty for those Facebook posts isn't some slap on the wrist. It's 15 years in a prison cell for one Facebook post. Unfortunately, this isn't an imaginary scenario. This is effectively what happened to my friend who's a Thai journalist living under his country's military dictatorship. He's facing 15 years behind bars for publicly criticizing the government and calling for democracy, a system that allows citizens to have a meaningful voice in decisions that affect their lives. The system that most of us take for granted. He's facing 15 years in jail for doing something that you and I do without a second thought, virtually every day. For something that we know we can do without consequence, and for something that he bravely continues to do, even while facing trial, because he believes that the citizens of Thailand deserve to have the same basic democratic freedoms that we do. Today, I'm going to show you that you don't realize how powerful you are. And in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you 5 concrete ways that you can help save democracy. We've forgotten a fundamental truth about democracy. Being a citizen is a full-time job. It's not something you can take for granted. Democracy isn't something that you do every 4 years. It's something that we shape every day through our actions, and increasingly through our inactions. It's time for a new civic code, across party lines and demographic groups, one that makes us responsible not just for doing our bit every few years, but for engaging with far more people, far more often, than just every few years at the ballot box. The crisis of democracy that we face today is partly born out of a crisis of civic engagement. I study democracy and authoritarianism across the globe, and democracy virtually everywhere is under threat. For decades, dictators have consolidated power from sub-Saharan Africa to Southeast Asia. Authoritarian populists are now winning elections, only to roll back democracy by capitalizing on division and fear. And here in the West, a huge number of people are dissatisfied with how democracy is functioning. Virtually nobody I speak to says that the system is going perfectly, that everything's going according to plan, and that we should just keep calm and carry on. I travel around the world to dictatorships and broken democracies for my research. From places like Madagascar to Tunisia, and from Thailand to the Ivory Coast, meeting with people on both sides of the battle for global democracy. I've had breakfast with despots and dinner with former dictators. I've sipped mango juice with rebels and tea with torture victims. But perhaps of all these encounters, the one that stood out the most to me was a coffee I had with a presidential candidate turned political prisoner, a man who willingly sacrificed his freedom to fight for others to have theirs. I traveled to Belarus recently, a place that's often referred to as the last dictatorship in Europe. Its capital, Minsk, is somewhat of a living museum for the Soviet Union. And here is the dictator himself, Alexander Lukashenko. He's a brutal, ruthless tyrant, and he presides over a surveillance state. Something so omnipresent, by the way, that it even affects the bathroom graffiti. Pretty nice resemblance, huh? But I got a taste of what it meant to live in a police state almost immediately after arriving. Shortly after I landed, I got several notifications that my accounts had been hacked. And then a few hours later, I met with this man, Nikolai Statkevich. We agreed to meet in a cafe in downtown Minsk. I walked in, and sure enough, there he was at a corner table, tucked away in the shadows. We shook hands, sat down, and he began telling me about his quest to bring democracy to this dictatorship. But as he began talking, a young woman walked into this large, empty cafe. She didn't hesitate or look around. Instead, she made a beeline for the table directly next to ours. She sat down, she pulled out her phone, she held it like this, and pretended that she was reading the news. Statkevich leaned in to me and whispered, I picked one of the cafes without microphones in the tables, so the KGB has to do it the old-fashioned way. Now, at the time, I wasn't sure whether he was joking or not, but with the KGB agent listening in, what he told me next was not funny. As a presidential candidate, he tried to hold a peaceful political rally, just pushing for more democracy in Belarus, when suddenly thugs from the ruling regime emerged from the darkness, abducted him, threw a bag over his head, and tossed him into a van. They drove him around for an hour without telling him where he was headed. His mind was racing. Was he being taken to a secluded forest to be shot? A dirt road to be beaten to death? Would he ever see his family again? As it turned out, he was tossed in a cold, dark jail cell and left to rot for years. They told him that he would be able to be released immediately if he only signed a confession, confessing to being a traitor conspiring against the nation rather than for democracy. Year after year, he refused. For nearly 5 years, Statkevich gave up his freedom so that others may someday have theirs. It was a solitary act from a man in solitary confinement, but it mattered. It mattered. Months later, after his release, back in that cafe with me in Minsk, with the KGB agent listening in, Statkevich looked me straight in the eyes, and he ended our conversation with 7 words I'll never forget. You don't realize how lucky you are. And with that, he got up and walked out into the cold December night, followed by the KGB agent, watching his every move. Now, I felt incredibly self-conscious in that moment. I've devoted my life to politics, but was I really doing enough? Am I a good citizen? Here's this guy who risked his life and nearly died to stand up to a dictator just to get the basic freedoms that I enjoy through no effort of my own, other than the completely random fact that I was lucky enough to be born in a democracy. And I realized he's absolutely right. We all have a form of invisible democratic privilege that we can't see and don't see because most of us have never lived without it. But like breathing in air, you don't realize it's there, but you'd feel like you were suffocating if it was taken away. The worst news for the future of democracy is that younger generations, those who have never confronted the brutality of authoritarianism or totalitarianism, they view democracy as more disposable than older people. In the UK, people born in the 1930s, 3 of 4 of them believe that democracy is essential. But only about 1 in 4 Brits born in the 1980s thinks the same. It's a huge change. The numbers are virtually the same in the US. Statkevich was right. We don't realize how lucky we are. But we also don't realize how powerful we are. And both of those things are true because we live in a democracy. But we need to recognize our extreme good fortune and our individual power if we're going to make democracy deliver on its promise of being a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Democracy is worth saving. It's worth fighting for. Few of us have been exposed to the horrors of authoritarian despotism, but I can tell you it's not pretty. I have seen children scrounging in trash piles in the street trying to find a single morsel of rotting food. I've gotten used to a grotesquely familiar pause in conversation when a torture victim struggles to find the right words to tell me how their fingernails were pulled off one by one, or how they were suspended from an iron rod like a roasted chicken and left for days without food or water. Democratic governments don't brutalize their citizens like that. They don't leave them to starve in the streets. And over the long run, democracy is much more stable. Democracies are also the engines of innovation, creativity, and prosperity in the modern world. But, to be fair, democracy isn't functioning perfectly right now. Wages have stagnated, inequality has soared, and millions of people feel completely powerless. Now, some of those issues are structural manifestations of problems like too much money in politics, the disproportionate influence of lobbyists, an unfair electoral system, and the fact that politicians are often out for themselves rather than for us. But the thing is, we have allowed that system to become our system. Imagine a world where democracy functions perfectly and lives up to its lofty promise, where governments are the best reflection of our society, and where problems are solved through thoughtful debate and compromise, rather than bickering, vitriol, and internet trolls. It's a nice thought, isn't it? But in some ways, we only really have ourselves to blame for the fact that we don't live in this imaginary world of perfect democratic prosperity. That's the bad news. But don't worry, there is good news. The good news is we can build that world. I know because I used to work in politics. I co-managed a campaign for governor in my home state of Minnesota, competing for millions of votes. And the first thing you realize when you work on a political campaign is that your job exists for literally one reason: to win. There's no prize for second place. So what do? You come up with a strategy based on a few harsh realities. And 3 of those realities stand out to every campaign. 1, poor people don't vote much. 2, young people don't vote much. And 3, someone who didn't vote last time probably won't vote this time either. When we were organizing events in the early stages of the campaign, we only reached out to people who had voted in at least 3 of the last 5 elections. Others just weren't worth the effort. When you have limited time and money, you focus it where it's most likely to count. You pick issues that matter to voters. Politicians pander to those who show up. That's why it's no surprise that young people are facing rising tuition costs and soaring debt, why job training programs and the social safety net are often first on the chopping block, and why those programs that cater to the most solid voters, the elderly, are deemed sacrosanct. So what about people out there who say, my vote doesn't count? They are wrong. They're wrong. I know because one of the big issues we worked on in the campaign was whether or not Minnesota should accept funding from the US government to pay for healthcare coverage for 220,000 more people. If we won, they would get it. If we lost, they wouldn't. We won by a few thousand votes out of several million ballots cast. 220,000 more people got healthcare coverage. Every vote counts. Nonetheless, one of the central paradoxes of our time is that most people are unhappy with the system, but many don't do much to change it. In 1950, 84% of British adults voted. 5 years after defeating fascism and saving democracy, people understood what a democratic privilege they had, and they exercised it. By 2001, that same figure had fallen to 59%. Thankfully, it crept up a bit this year to 68%. But still, more than 3 out of every 10 people you see on a daily basis didn't take the time to vote this year. Voter apathy is even worse in the US. In the 2014 congressional elections, just 36% of people voted. 64 out of every 100 didn't bother. And even in last year's presidential election, one of the most consequential votes in American history, only 60% of people voted. That meant that less than 30% of people voted for Donald Trump to be president, while nearly 40% of people didn't vote. Apathy beat Trump by 10 points, but Trump, and not apathy, is in the Oval Office. In his election, 80,000 voters spread across 3 states tipped the election. The people who determined the outcome could fit in a single football stadium. So why don't people vote? A common complaint I hear on both sides of the Atlantic is that we didn't like any of the candidates. But we get the candidates we deserve. In 2016, only 7% of American adults voted for Hillary Clinton in the presidential primary, the process of selecting candidates. Only 6% voted for Donald Trump. 75% didn't vote. In the UK, citizen participation rates in leadership election contests is even lower. It just takes 20 minutes every 4 years to help determine the people who end up being the most powerful people on earth, the people who affect the life chances of ourselves, our children, and literally billions around the planet. But democracy doesn't work if people don't participate. Yes, blame the system. It's broken. But we have the power to fix it. The power that people like my journalist friend or Mikolaj Statkevich are literally willing to die for. And that is a huge problem with how democracy is functioning. But I'm not here to chastise you. I'm not a perfect citizen myself, so I can't really claim any high ground here. But I am here to remind us of our collective power. And I'm here to give you 5 concrete ways that you can help save democracy. 1, vote. Vote in every election, not just the big ones. The people we elect at the local level become the people we elect at the national level. If you don't believe me, Barack Obama won 16,000 votes the first time he was elected. 2, Before every election, talk to 10 people you know about voting, particularly if they're not politically active, and especially if they're from an underrepresented group. Make voting a social activity. Organize drinks or coffee or lunch. Go together. And ask those 10 people to talk to 10 people too. 3, in between elections, be the boss to the politicians you love or hate. If they don't get feedback, they won't change. Write to them, protest, call, register people to vote, and ask your friends to do the same. 4, reach out to someone who views the world completely differently from how you view it, and try to find common ground. We're more polarized than ever, but democracy requires compromise to function. Disagree without being disagreeable. If you like politicians who build bridges rather than walls, then try to do the same in your own political interactions. And 5, run for office or organize a new political group, even at the most local level. Town council, local school board, whatever it is, get involved. The longer-term solutions to save democracy, like better civic education, campaign finance, and electoral reform, are much harder and take much longer. But we can't expect others to make the change we want to see. It's from this final point that my own interest in politics stems. When I was 8 years old, my mom was very unhappy with the direction of the local school district. So she ran as a candidate for local school board. And I'm happy to say she crushed her opponent with the ingenious slogan of "Vote straight A's for Brian Klaas." It's a lot of A's. In the process, she didn't just improve local education policy. She also sparked my future engagement in politics. Seemingly small actions produce democratic ripples. And with enough ripples, together, we can produce a tsunami of democratic change. Thank you.